This is Carla with Reef Ball Foundation. I'm projects manager and executive assistant for to show Dr. Austin Kirby Bowden how to do a reef ball mold setup and pour. So what we're going to do is do a quick run through of our items that we're going to be needing for the first portion, and that's our setup of our mold. I'll give a little bit of instruction and reasons for each of these pieces as I go along. So if you'll follow with me, I've got pins here. I've got washers. I have wedges. And then I have sets, and you'll see what these are used for in a little bit. I do have a pair of gloves. I also wear a little underneath just for insulation. You're going to need a manual flathead screwdriver, hammer, anchor plugs, or excuse me, these are the the coral plugs that we use. All right, they've got washers on both sides. That is so that the screw doesn't pull through the hole. That is also on the other side so that the threading doesn't get any concrete in the threads. When we're pouring these, that's going to be very important. We also use these on the tops. They're just little medicine cups, and they come right out of the reef ball mold. We put them in the top just for extra coral plugs. And then we get the anchor rods, which we'll show you where those go. We've got an A0 buoy ball, which we're using for this particular oyster ball mold. It's quite a bit smaller, but that's going to make thicker sides for us. I've got some medium-sized toy balls. They are squishy. We do not inflate them all the way. And we've got some smaller ones, which are also squishy. And those we put at the top. We call those chickens, and I'll explain why when we get there. So what we're going to do is start out with our base, which is extremely important to have a base. You can do it in the ground, but for this, all intents and purposes, it's just best to have a base. I'm going to show you how to set that up. I've got multiple holes here. We've set this up several times for different reasons and built on this, but that's not going to be a problem. You just fill those holes with sand. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the location of our holes where we want to put them. All right, so I think right about there. Now if I was putting in 2, 3, 4 molds, I would set them up, and then I would mark the holes and go ahead and drill with a 5/8 inch drill bit. All right, and I would just come in here and drill the hole. All right, one there, one there. Set that aside. We won't be needing that again. Now we can remove this, and I'll go ahead and set up the pins before I get to the mold. There's a few things I want to describe about that. So I'm going to take my hammer and my pins, bring this up from the back side. I'm going to put in my pins, get them in, set this back down. So that's where that's going to go. Now, we are already at our mold stage. We have already cleaned off our mold of a lot of the excess, concrete. Just a rubber mallet. A lot of times pressure washers can work as well. Just hose them down. That doesn't have to be sparkling clean. A little bit of the concrete actually helps for demolding later on. We've already put in coral plug adapters here and over here, so that when we pull them off, it is just going to come straight back like this. You never want to put coral plug adapter holes on the sides. You will never be able to pull it apart. It'll wedge in there like this. So always make sure to keep it on this front side. The bigger the mold, the more coral plugs you can go around it. There's 2 or 3 or 4 panels, but just be careful about when you're pulling back this way, they need to have as little angle on this front side as possible. We've also drilled our anchor holes. Those are important to have in place up front and beforehand. Now, I have already wiped down these coral plug adapters after our last pour. That's usually a good thing to go ahead and do. If you use the sugar water, well, you have to use the sugar water. That's going to release your molds from the reef ball when you pull it away. It'll also give you that nice rough texture that we need to have on a reef ball. So I'm going to go ahead and spray this before I set it up. It keeps me from having to try and do it while it's already set up and move the bottle around. It's going upside down and so forth. Now, I will also wipe down those. This can dry on here, by the way. The sugar water can dry on the ball. It actually helps a lot. You don't need a lot of sugar, just that it's got some sugar in the water. If you have bees around, you can use almond extract, just a drop or two. That'll help keep the bees away from the sugar water. They love the stuff. So I'm going to take my rag, wipe off that sugar water from the coral plug adapters. It won't make a huge difference if you leave it on, but we do like to try and keep that clear. All right. So now that we've got that on there, it's fine if the sugar water dries, not a problem. I'm going to put these on my pins now, just like I had it set up before. And now we're going to move over to our washers and our wedges. I will need the hammer. So always put a washer first. And typically we have a steel base plate, about yay big, but they're pretty heavy. And we would put those on there. The holes would be further out this way. So you would just do the same thing with the washer and the base plate with the wedges. But for your trip, since we're trying to keep things light and breezy, then we just went ahead and left those off. Put the wedge in. It doesn't have to be tight. This is not facing the correct way, so I'm going to tap that into place. It's going right to left, big end to little. Same way over here. Just tap it to where you need it to be, right to left. And then I'm going to use my set. These are for the sides. You can see those. All right. So we're going to disassemble to the pin in one washer. We're going to stick it again right to left. Now, most times you will only need one more washer on this side, and then you stick the wedge up from the top down to the bottom. I'll show you on this other side. And if the wedge hits the bottom without it being tight here, then you know you need another washer. You will need another washer. It will be put on this side of that pin, if that's the case. Now, before I cinch that up, tighten all this up, and come over here and do the same. It is easier to get it all together before you tighten everything down. All right, there we go. And then it just pinches it together right there. Same here. All right, now I'm going to tighten these down. That is not going anywhere. And that's as the concrete goes in, it would start to pull away from the base, but now it's definitely on there. It's not going anywhere. No sliding. All right. So we've got our sugar water in place, our coral plug adapters in place. It is on its base and it's fine. Now what we're going to do is use wet sand. You can put it in dry and then spray the sand in the bottom. But the thing to remember about the wet sand is you need it along the base. It gives you a wavy bottom. Little critters can go up inside of there and make little homes and places for them to hide, which is great. But it's also for the anchors to go in to and stand upright at an angle. That's pretty important. I always go around the entire bottom, and then I put piles in front of these anchor holes, and then just use a few more piles here and there, just around. Have some fun with it. No problem. Doesn't have to be completely covered. It doesn't have to even be pretty. It just needs to have some in there to give a little bit of bottom. The concrete will come up from it. I'm just putting it over here where the anchors are going to be. Did you want to see that, Todd? Look in here before I put in the balls. All right, so it's just kind of a wavy bottom like so, and we've got it in front of each of the anchor holes. All right, now we're going to put in 4 balls. And I avoid those anchor holes most definitely. I'm going to stage them kind of in different places, 2 on one side, 2 on the other. Keep an eye out for your coral plug adapters. It's okay if they touch. They're just kind of scattered, and that'll help. All right. Now comes your buoy ball. All right. Typically an A1 would be used, but we do want a little thicker, heavier ball, so we are using an A0. This plastic here is kind of weak, so that's why we don't use an electric drill on it. You can, it's just be very, very careful. Do not lose this. Stick it in a pocket, put it somewhere safe in a cup or something of that sort so it doesn't get misplaced. Without it, this won't work. So I know that doesn't seem like a very safe place, but we'll figure that out. We're going to stick this in. All right. Now what we need here is compressed air. You can use an air compressor or we can use a scuba tank. That's not a problem. You will need an adapter to blow the air in. My tank is on. Let's get a little closer. Now what we're trying to do here, we want these 2 balls in next to the chickens. The chickens are these holes here that are being pushed in. The buoy ball is simply going to press against them, and these will be on its opposite sides here and here. So it'll have 4 holes basically at the top of the reef ball. So as I'm doing this, I want to also consider where these are going. We'll do it nice and slow. There we go. I think that's about all it's going to get. So the chickens are just barely on there. Like I said, the A0 is going to make it a lot thicker of a ball on the sides. But that'll help us be able to get our concrete down in there and make this a very solid, heavy ball, which is fine. Okay. So, if that valve isn't working, you're going to want someone there to immediately put this in, screw it on tight. There we go. Now what I'm going to do is spray, just right on top of that screw. So when Todd ends up pulling the concrete on, it won't go anywhere. And I only put a little dribble in there. He likes to use the air hose to blow the concrete out of that, and you can do that as well. So, the anchor plugs here, anchor holes here, we're going to put those in after he pours, and they're just going to go directly into the sand at an angle like this on either side. We're going to leave those there for about 2-3 hours, and then we're going to twist them. You only twist, you do not move them, you do not pull them, you do not push them. You simply twist, and then that will be ready to pull out as right before you demold is fine. So, okay, I'm going to hand it over to Todd, and here we are.
Hello, Dr. Bowden. We are going to show you how to mix the concrete. I'm going to be mixing this by hand, so I'm not going to follow exact formula. We'll give you the formula from the website to do your exact portions, but I do this a lot, so I'm just going to mix up a pretty liquidy concrete. We want to have about a 7 to a 9 inch slump of our concrete. Slump is measured by the markers that you would see marking a parking lot, the cones. If you filled the concrete up with that cone, it was a 15-inch cone, and you put it on the ground and remove the cone, how far down it slumps is a measure of how liquidy the concrete is. So if it slumps down 7 to 9 inches from 15 inches, that's about the right. We don't want it so liquidy that it comes out the bottom of the mold or the sides. In fact, the sides are meant to be not completely tight so that you can see that. We also want it to be not so thick that you have to beat on the mold with a vibrator or a mallet. And the reason why you don't want to vibrate the mold is the center bladders can try to rise up and it can change the form of what you're doing. So when I mix concrete, the amount of water that you use is going to control the total amount of concrete you're going to mix. My goal is to make a whole bucket here. I'm going to use 3 parts gravel, 2 parts sand, and 1 part cement in my mix as a basic design. Today we're a little short on gravel, so I'm going to use some shells instead of gravel. We start out by putting the water in, and the water is at 49% of the amount of Portland cement. So figure 2 to 1. If you're using 2 cups of Portland cement, you'd use 1 cup of water.
While Todd's doing that, I need to add something. The sand that I put into the bottom of the mold and the sand that he is using, it cannot be saltwater sand. It cannot be off the beach. It needs to be washed sand is what you'd call it. It can't have hints of salt water in it whatsoever. Play sand is great. Anything you'd like to add?
Or wash sand.
Or wash sand, just, you know, it needs to be well rinsed and clean.
Okay, one of the most important ingredients we use in reef balls is called microsilica. This comes out of the stacks of computer making. It's a very, very fine powder. This powder is dangerous to be breathed. It's just like what comes out of coal mines. It could cause cancer like smoking cigarettes would. So I'm going to add this to the water first, and the reason I want to do that is so that it's not up in the air and getting in my face. You can also wear a respirator. As soon as it gets in the water, it's completely non-toxic. So we always add that first. Just be careful to stay upwind of it if it's a windy day. I'm going to use between 2% to a maximum of 10% of volume of microsilica to concrete. When you're using larger balls, you're going to be normally going down to more closer to 2% because it's a little bit expensive. In smaller balls, we might use a little extra. What microsilica does is it doubles the strength of your concrete, allows it to be strong enough that we don't have to use any kind of iron reinforcement or rebar in a reef ball that would be detrimental to marine life. Alright, so after I add that, I would normally start going 3-2-1 rocks, sand, and concrete. In this case, I'm going to do them all together because I'm using a drill mixer. You can use a regular concrete mixer. Be careful with drill mixers. These things are very strong and they tend to cause kickback. So when you're mixing, you're going to hold with your legs the bucket so it doesn't spin around. Alright, so now I'm going to add 3, 2, and 1. And then I would mix the concrete. If it's not thick, I would keep adding 3, 2, and 1 until I get a relatively thick paste. Because I'm in a shortcut, I'm going to do this a little faster. Okay, now I'm going to try to mix it.
Oh boy. You want some water on top of that? Oh, you want some water on top of that?
This mixer's not working very good.
Yeah,
I think I need a new battery.
that was a new battery.
You see it's still very thin, so I'm going to add more cement. Might need just a little bit more.
Oh.
A little more cement. Do we have any garlic? Again, I'm looking for a pretty thick mix. Alright, now see how it's good and thick and the rocks are at the top? At that stage, I'm going to add Advaflow, and this is a water reducer. So you're going to find that this a small amount, a couple of capfuls, is now going to make the concrete very liquidy again. So I don't have too much water in it, and it'll become very easy to mix. If you want to look in there, you'll see it's almost like a liquid. At this point, I can put my fibers in. There's the fibers. Small amount of fibers. That's going to help keep cracking down in the concrete. I'm also going to add some red dye 242.
I'm going to show them that.
This does not mix with the concrete. It'll float to the surface and give us a red color. That will simulate crustose coralline algae, which will help to attract corals to settle on the reef ball. And then again, I'll just continue mixing. Okay, if you look at that, I put so much added flow, that's even a little more than a 7 to 9 inch slump. So I'm going to, by eye, adjust it with a little more cement. And this is the most critical part for doing reef balls. You want it to be sort of just right. Too thick and it's going to be hard to get in your mold and give you all kind of problems. And too thin and the rocks won't stay suspended. And you'll have what's called broken concrete, where the concrete would come to the top and the rocks would all settle to the bottom of your reef ball. Okay, you see the rocks are now floating on the surface, and now I'm just going to pour this into the reef ball. Put your anchors inside. Put it back in the top. You have some newspaper to put in those. This concrete is a little bit too liquidy. I hit about 11-inch slump, which is doable. But we need some newspaper. And it looks like I need a little more concrete, so I'm gonna, while he's getting the newspaper, I'm gonna make a second batch.
Paper towel work?